Go ahead and recording. The Center for Global Development on their Equality and Inclusion team, and I'm also the chair of IAFFE's Online Events Committee. So again, welcome on behalf of IAFFE and behalf of the Online Events Committee. Today's event is part of our ongoing Fireside Chat series, which provides the opportunity to do deep dives with IAFFE scholars on their work, including books that have been released. So we'll be talking about one of Caroline's books today. We also have online events in numerous other events, so please look out for more information regarding those. And you can also catch up on past events you may have missed on our YouTube channel. And Wendy's going to drop that link in the chat for us. As with those past events, as you saw, you got a notification. Today's event is going to be recorded and posted to IAFFE's YouTube. We also have interpretation today in Portuguese. So you can utilize that at the bottom of the Zoom thing. You can translate or click the button and be able to hear in Portuguese as well. So again, friendly reminder to keep yourself muted. There will be a Q&A section of this event in which we will invite you to use the raise hand function to ask questions. But throughout the event, we're going to be posting resources in the chat. Feel free to do that as well. Put in questions and comments as well. So I'm going to go ahead now and introduce our moderator for today. So Dr. Suzanne Bergeron is the Graves Collegiate Professor Emerita of Women's Studies and Social Sciences at the University of Michigan Dearborn. She's been a member of IAFFE since 1993, where she attended IAFFE's Out of the Margin Conference as a graduate student. Her current research examines the possibilities for recognizing and fostering diverse, non-capitalist economic practices in gender equity policy contexts. She's a member of the Community Economies Research Network, the International Feminist Journal of Politics Editorial Board, the Rethinking Care in the Global Economy Advisory Board, and also serves as an elder to the Diverse Social Economies Collective, which today's featured author founded. Her most recent book is the 2021 second edition of Liberating Economics, Feminist Perspectives on Families, Work, and Globalization, co-authored with Susan Feiner and the late Drew Barker. So Suzanne, thank you so much for moderating today's session, and welcome Caroline as well. I'll turn it over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Mary, for your generous introduction, and many thanks to the rest of the IAFFE Online Events Committee for your great work in organizing this session. So it's just been wonderful work with you so far, and I'm really excited to be in conversation today with my dear friend Caroline Shenaz Hossein. Caroline and I have worked together for about a decade on a number of different feminist political economy projects, most notably through the Diverse Social Economies, or DISE collective, which she founded. And as you just mentioned, I'm an elder or member of the advisory board for. Her deeply collaborative, anti-racist feminist scholarship highlighting the solidarity economy activity of women in the African diaspora is, to me, some of the most exciting work being done in feminist economics today. So I'm really looking forward to today's fireside chat, where we'll be able to share some of Caroline's ideas in a more informal setting. But first, a bit more about Caroline. She's currently the professor of global development at the University of Toronto Scarborough. She's a member of the IAFFE board. She's the founder of the aforementioned DISE collective. She holds the Canada Research Chair 2 in Africana Development and Feminist Political Economy, and she's also an Ontario Early Researcher Award winner. She's the editor for the UN Task Force on Social and Solidarity Economy, Caroline University Journals Polity and Society, and the Review of Black Social Economy. She's the author of a number of books, including Politicized Microfinance. She's the co-author of Critical Introduction to Business and Society, the editor of the Black Social Economy, the co-editor of Community Economies in the Global South and Beyond Racial Capitalism, which we're talking about today. And her book, The Banker Ladies, was just like a week ago published by the University of Toronto Press. Her book, Africana Feminist Political Economy, is forthcoming on Cambridge University Press. And prior to becoming an academic, she worked for many years with nonprofits and international development organizations. So there's so much more I could say about you, Caroline, but that's a brief introduction to some of the things you've been doing. So Welcome.
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me.
Great. So I'm going to give you your first question. Can you provide us with a brief overview of how you first became interested in anti-racist feminist political economy, and then maybe tell us a little about the evolution of your work over time?
For sure. But first I want to say thank you to the swells of people who have come out today on a Friday, early for some folks, depending on what coast you're on, and late for others. And I want to say thank you to a lot of the Brazilians who are out and it's being translated. A real pleasure. It's humbling for me to be here in company with Mary Borrowman, who has been great at organizing these fireside chats, and of course my comrade Suzanne Bergeron at the DISE Collective. When did I become interested in disrupting mainstream political economy from an anti-racist feminist perspective? And I think about that, and I believe that this has been a life's work. It's practice that has created the scholar that I am. I believe that my own lived experience as someone being raised in the 70s to immigrant Caribbean parents, unskilled, uneducated, relocating from their lands to, New York City and then later Toronto, to really try to deal with the economic inequalities that exist, and bearing witness to that my entire life, and encountering that really does shape one's life perspective when we come into the work that we do as feminists. So I guess I am what Roxane Gay calls the bad feminist. It's been a small f, not pedestal type of feminist that really is concerned about those interlocking identities that get cast aside or are conveniently used and misused and appropriated when feminism thinks that it's all right to do so. So that's where I'm coming from. It's a very sort of Caribbean, African-centric sort of ethos when it comes to my branding of sort of anti-racism feminism. And it's the practice of where I worked, like you mentioned. I worked for a decade and a half in global development, trying to figure out how we get financial goods to some of the most excluded people on our planet. And I think working with African Americans in Philadelphia, out of Germantown, really did craft the kind of feminist I am today, because I started looking at all these isms, these kinds of exclusions that happen within Black society and outside of it, but especially as a people who have been in the West and historically underrepresented. And how do we not replicate those social and economic inequalities when we do good work outside of where we are living? And so that kind of anti-racist feminism has been really a part of my own sort of being as who I am as a person. And of course, just the lived experience of practice, being a practitioner, vested in how do we change public policy? So it was no surprise when I got into research and the university that I would bring that baggage with me, So I think I'll stop there because I think many people on this call might be resonating with this, because we often find ourselves alone in the academy when you dare to bring up these kind of subjective, unapologetic ways of being as an anti-racist feminist. Yes.
Well, great, thanks. Maybe this may come up in the conversation later as well, but let's move on and talk a little bit more, a little bit more of a focus on your scholarship here, which focuses attention on the solidarity economy activities of women in the African diaspora. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance of highlighting those activities, particularly given some of the failures of mainstream approaches?
Yeah, and I think that this is what makes my research at times useful to feminist economics, but also on the margins of the very discipline that I'm trained in, both political science and political economy, and straddle sort of this heterodox economics field. And for me, it was important to move away from a kind of sort of negative or deficit framing approach to racially marginalized people when we think about economics or political economy. Because so much of the disciplines in which I'm trained in has been to accentuate formalized institutions, right? I mean, we understand why we're doing that because of ease of access to the data, the metrics we want to use, how we want to analyze this power or these exclusions or the alienation of labor. Operating through formalized institutions can facilitate, make easier those kinds of analyses. And they have a place in our scholarship. The issue is that when you want to understand really deep forms of structural exclusion happening, particularly in very minoritized kinds of environment in the West, what you find is that we can't only play in the understanding of formal institutions. And so for me, as a scholar concerned about people of African descent in the Americas, I really wanted to shed a light, not on their participation in economic systems as a coping device solely, but I wanted to shed light on the informal institutions that bring value to how we understand covert forms of power, exclusion, alienation of their labor, the erasure. It was really important to start thinking, are these people who participate in informalized institution worthy of study, right? And I think that the emphasis or the tiering of how we look at institutions has been very problematic coming out of certain mainstream disciplines like economics and political science. And so I think where my contribution has been helpful has been to sort of unraveling the mystique or the mystery around informal institutions, and also to take it away from sort of homogenizing it as kind of like, well, that's the place that people who are less fortunate go to find community. And I wanted to see it as a place of self-help on people's own terms. You know, I grew up listening to Bob Marley, and Marcus Garvey was something that was always playing in my household. And it was really about emancipation of mental slavery, right? Like, how do people use the local devices, the informalized networks and systems that they have to mitigate the oppression and the violence that is occurring in our world, right? And so that's really why the solidarity economy has made so much sense in a way to amplify the alternatives that actually exist. And I guess we should say alternatives in quotations, because I'm not sure, you know, that these alternatives are anything new. They've always been there. We just haven't seen them. We haven't studied them as intensely as we should be, but there's so much work to do. And I think in so many ways, it's this moving away from a deficit framing of Black folk on the on the lines waiting for handouts and subsidies and coping, that has been a good story for some time, particularly in global development. But what about that, I don't know, positive celebrity framing that is more hopeful, not romanticized, but is actually like real life? People are getting on with business, self-help, mutuality on their own terms. And can that kind of Black feminist political economy be useful to folks who are interested in anti-capitalist economic discourse? And I believe that there's a place for that. And some of that work of highlighting the solidarity economy for African people, Suzanne, has been, coming out of my own work with and engaged with, like you, in many ways, with the community economies, diverse economies literature that is so abound and so global, that has made it useful for me to start seeing beyond the binaries of capitalocentrism or Marxism in its full force, to see feminist community economies as something more collaborative, something that has time for informal and formal, but things that are activities that are hidden, but that have, as there's an Indigenous scholar in Canada, Leanne Bettasamoke, wrote, "As we've always done." And, these systems of collectivity and coming together, do it ourselves, has always been populating the planet, both in the North and the South. So I think that's an important piece of work, and there's so much more to explore and amplify, and to learn about how power and exclusion actually operates and how people contend with it in these spaces.
That's great. Thank you very much. I really think it's so important, your challenge to the deficit framing, because so often if we acknowledge these activities, we see them as mere survival and lesser than, and something to be replaced, right, by something more formal. But I think what's important about your work is you are pointing to beyond survival to even thriving, and I just think that's such an important reframing.
And it's like self-love, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's about how do we cooperate in a system that has been so forced and individualistic that it alienates people, even when it's trying to assist those very people, right? It invisibilizes their labor, it erases it. We keep going back to the same kind of colonial political economy library, and we are not waking up to the multitude of experiences and case studies and literatures that are really all abound. I mean, it is so much that is there that can inform a new kind of economy making.
Yes. I have my next question I want to ask you, but I just want to make a comment that I was recently reading Joanna Rostick's new book on feminist history of thought, and she's the next Fireside Chat. And in the book, she was talking about the fact that when we look at why there are so few women in the history of economic thought, maybe the question is not why did they produce such a small amount of work, but maybe the right question is that we need, right thing to do is question the very notion of what the economy is and what economic knowledge is. And I think that this is something you were just articulating.
Correct, yeah. Look, rethinking timelines and geographies are so critical in terms of the work we do as anti-racist feminists. And I also add on cooperativism, because I do think that that's the sort of stand-up institution, membership institutions that really can fly in the face of corporatized ways of existing in this world, right?
Yes, absolutely. So when we were preparing for this, I was thinking about how your work has influenced my own feminist economics scholarship. And for instance, your first book changed my previously dim and completely capital-centric view of gendered microfinance. And it helped me to grasp its diverse economic forms and practices. And your more recent work on remapping the economy through an anti-racist feminist lens has also helped me to kind of decolonize my own thinking about the social and solidarity economy. So I was just wondering if these are some of the ways you have hoped to push feminist economists and feminist economics into new directions, and if so, why do you think that those pushes are needed? And maybe are there other directions you're hoping to, you would like to see feminist economics kind of push in this vein?
Yeah, well, first I want to say thank you. I'm most humbled, and it's always, we often work in our silos in the academy and alone, and are dealing with repercussions of being different when we think about economics and, political economy in new ways. So it's very humbling for me to hear that impression of my work on your work, which I admire quite a lot. So thank you very much for that. I think for me, the end goal of what I'm trying to do, as why I came to the academy, is really to make sure that the research that I do has bearing and and makes change in the kind of world I want to be a part of. How many books do we write before we start having an impact on society, right? And so for me, the work that I'm doing on financial economies, particularly people of the African diaspora, has been really important that I think about ideas of liberation. What does freedom look like under white supremacy in our economic system that is incredibly corporatized and uses and abuses Black women as nothing and constantly there to extract and kill us? How do we then do political economy, feminist political economy, in a way that really starts valuing the kind of liberation we want to see for all people? And that's how I center the work. That's where I see feminist economics moving. I want to see more fertilization, engagement with Black political economy, Black feminist political economy, community economies that kind of push away from binary understandings of politicized financial arrangements. Because when we work in the South, we start to see how nuanced and complex relationships and identities become. And so for me, I really do hope one of the new directions, or there's lots of opportunity for scholars to start, feminist scholars to start thinking about cooperative economics in the work that they're doing, membership institutions, as kind of being a vehicle to rethink economic systems, because it's not about sort of trying to make more of a social enterprise exist in a commercial economy. For me, it's all about how, as feminists, do we look at the very system that has been so alienating and oppressive to us as women in the North and the South, and how do we transform that economic system? And I believe it's through membership institutions. And so that's where I'm hoping that, together with the practice and the activists that are very much a part of the IAFFE landscape, that scholars and practitioners and activists really start fusing the work that we're doing together so we can make a difference for the very people that we're here to really serve.
Okay, great. Thank you. Wonderful.
And, you know, I just
Yeah,
want to
go on.
trouble it a little bit in that the DISE collective and all the members that you're a part of, Silvani Silva's here today. I see Charu Sheila here.
Mary's here.
Mary Kinyan Dewey, all these DISE collective women who are showing up all the time, are bringing their lived experience, they're bringing their practice, they're bringing their research, because top of mind are the very people you all engage with. And I think that that's the kind of feminist economics we want to see in our world, not ones that study people downwards like a colonial subject, but ones that really fuse the work that we are doing through togetherness, right? And we all come from different geographies, life experiences. And what we're doing here is trying to really shake up neoliberal branding of feminist economics in a heightened and new way that actually sees the people on the ground. That's
Great.
it now. I'll stop
Yes.
here.
And also I think, again, you know, echoing, you know, a comment I made before, it really reframes expertise as well, like from the ground, you know, and you know,
For
but
sure.
and that comes out in your most recent book. So let's talk about that book, because
Okay.
that comes up in a couple of the chapters in Beyond Racial Capitalism, Co-operatives in the African Diaspora. What motivated you and your collaborators to take up that project? And can you describe for people who haven't read it yet some of the key insights in that book? You know, briefly.
Yeah.
I know it's a
So
lot.
Beyond Racial Capitalism, I have to say that of all the books, I think I'm book number 7. This is the most popular book that is coming out of community. I'm doing more community type of coffee shop book talks than I have ever done in my career. And I think that the accessibility in terms of price point and topic, and even the method that we use through case study analysis has really resonated with everyday people, particular people of African descent across the diaspora. So Beyond Racial Capitalism, this book, was actually supposed to be a part of a larger project on community economies in the Global South to be produced by one major press. It's supposed to be like not making a difference between North and South, but looking at historically oppressed people in the Americas with those in the Global South, and to analyze cooperative informal institutions. Peer review didn't make that possible. They actually complicated our life drastically, like really intensely, to a point where we realized that perhaps we actually do have 2 book projects. So Beyond Racial Capitalism became the project that no one wanted to take up, actually. And when you look at the 2 books, the Community Economies in the Global South book is at a higher price point. It was produced faster. The peer review was flawless. As Christabel PJ, my colleague and editor, would say, it was a dream project to produce. Beyond Racial Capitalism was a book of delays. It had really intense, sort of hostile, in some respect, peer review. People were really upset about the US cases in particular, to some extent, Ireland's case and Canada. So what we saw was that, wow, there's actually a need for us to trouble the concept of racial capitalism in Black political economy, but also for the social solidarity and cooperative economy, who were sort of tiptoeing around the idea of racial exclusion, but because they're marginal firms in a corporate business world, they weren't really tackling inequity within cooperative and membership institutions. So I think this book does a couple things. It's a book with 9 case studies, a few in the US, as I mentioned, with Nigerian immigrants, with Mayan indigenous Black Mexicans in New York and New Jersey. We see cases from the Caribbean, such as Haiti, Jamaica, Guyana, that I do, but also Kevin Edmonds, my co-editor, looks at St. Lucia and St. Vincent. We have Sharon Austin at Florida University, who does a case with Tatiana Benjamin, who looked at Jamaican diaspora in New York, but also African Americans in the Washington, D.C. area with giving circles. Silvani Silva, who's on the call here, does a superb analysis of the Quilombo, a cooperative marronage, freedom-fighting Black Brazilian economic system. And so these kinds of case studies came together as sort of like a responsibility for us to document cooperativism, informal, formal, for the cooperative sector. There were case studies with Jackson Rising, Amina Mama and Adote Beng, who are on a mission to do cooperative Africa right now. We're really trying to have the formal cooperative sector recognize the economic contributions of African people on the continent to formalized cooperative institutions. Ibon Joseph in Dublin calls herself the original Black Irish. She's been in Dublin for 30 years, looking at labor issues out of Ireland for newly emigrated Nigerian women, and does a superb study that was really, having a lot of tough time through the peer review to acknowledge informal financial systems that new immigrants will rely on when they move to Dublin, Ireland. So this collection of storytelling, empirical work, a lot of it through interview, was sort of testimonial in a way. It speaks about the traumas, it speaks about some of the problems that people have in this kind of, pooling of goods, but it does speak to new kinds of cooperative institutions. And I think the book wanted to look at that in conversation with racism, sexism, and classism that is existing through this idea of, or Cedric Robinson's popularized term of racial capitalism. And I think that the cooperative sector is listening. I think that cooperators around the world are interested in this work because they're trying to figure out, how do we grow our tent? If there are all these cooperators that have moved to the West and already understand the new kind of collective economy we're trying to build, how do we invite them to participate and grow this solidarity economy movement? And I think that that's the work of this book. It's trying to give people ideas about what you can do in your own backyard as feminists concerned about economic democracy.
Great, great. I mean, there's so many things that the book brings up. And again, at some meta level, I think the book really decenters the typical story about the origins of social and solidarity economies, which are usually seen to originate in the West and then spread out from there. And your book just totally challenges that. But
and it's timeline, right? We look at timeline. And I think Mary Kinyanjui, who studied for decades the Vayama and the Chama systems and SACCOs in East Africa, really show how ancient these systems of cooperation are, right? And then, so it depends on where we go on the timeline, will depend on the kind of story making we do.
Yes. Exactly. But I want to dive into the case studies a little bit because the book shows so clearly how important solidarity economy activities are to Black community resistance to the racial capitalist economy. For those of us who want to like support that project, what are some of the challenges that the communities that were studied face in creating and sustaining cooperative economic systems? You know, what are some kind of policy or other changes that you might recommend to support these efforts, including things that feminist economists could do?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So part of this work on solidarity economy is not a rosy picture, right? I mean, a lot of these scholars have hard time doing this actual research because it means to go into to choose to study informal institutions when you're untenured or precarious can be tricky work. So I don't want to make light of that. But I do, so the scholars themselves are taking on some risk in the kind of material and research that they're doing. So that's why it made sense for us to come together through case study analysis. But the challenges that the people we uncovered vary depending on the context. But what was real in many cases, because these are informal institutions, is that there are, I mean, I think the issues of not seeing and recognizing the labor of cooperativism by Black and Afro-descended people in the cooperative sector. So that constant doing the labor behind the scenes without being recognized, which feminists, all of us can recognize through care economies. But the fact that, you know, this activism, as Nina Banks has spoken about, isn't being counted as part of the labor that goes into how we do economic development. It's missing. There's fear-mongering that happens across the different contexts in nuanced ways. And what I mean by that is that in some cases, the cooperators, mostly women, many of them financially marginalized, are doing this work in secrecy because of fear of sabotage, confiscation of their monies, arrest, or any kind of legal troubles that label them as terrorists, label them as drug dealing, label them as in the promotion of weapons trafficking. I mean, because we're dealing with African descended people working in informal institutions and it's about money sharing, the questions and the persecution of what they're doing has had to be hidden from purview. So people are hiding a lot of what they do because of the fear-mongering and the labels and the negative stigma associated with them being cooperators of a different sort. And that's part of the story and the case study analysis as scholars, to use our positioning of power and the access and the opportunities we have to document the kind of work that people are doing in the face of serious adversity that is happening in the context they live in. And so I'm giving you sort of a menu of harms that actually happen to cooperators, which many mainstream solidarity cooperative people often aren't attuned to. They know these systems are hidden, but they don't know the depth of exclusion and fear that many of these people are contending with. I think Jessica Gordon Nembhard's book stands as an excellent go-to material, collective courage, to understand the historical practice of cooperativism and how in the US context, that work of cooperativism had to be hidden because sabotage and murder were really what could happen to you if people realized that you were doing economic collectivity. So, I mean, this is the reality of what these political economists are encountering when they meet people. And it takes literally years to build the confidence of people. And I keep saying, you know, in the Caribbean, the work was civilized for me because at least these cooperators are being recognized and there's some sense of gratitude to the kind of economic democracy that these women are doing from the ground up. In the West, where there's violence, anti-Black racism, exclusion to another level, people are in hiding to really admit that they're doing these things. And this work, my work, falls in line with a lot of the collective courage of Gordon Nembhard and builds on that really astounding sort of 10-year book that she wrote to really tell a story that cooperativism had to be hidden because of the violence in the societies we live in.
No, absolutely. And I think about, you've said that your book, The Banker Ladies, it took you like 10 years to do that. And I'm wondering if it's in part because it took so long to develop trust with your, you know, the people you were doing research with.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the fear mongering, we can say it's perception, but the actual indignities and violence that people have to undergo to do something that actually helps civic society grow was, you know, like beyond perplexing to me. It was one of the most saddest things I've had to witness day in, day out, to carry that and to witness the abuse that people who live on the margins are giving all this extra care, labor. Women, Black women who call themselves feminist cooperators are being vilified because they are actually contributing to a more inclusive economy is just the worst kind of work that we do. And we owe them. We actually, I'm taking it another level to answer your question, in policy making, and that's why it's so important that an association like IAFFE that has such strong academic grounding, that we pair up with the activists and the policymakers to make sure that we transform public policy, particularly in development, but community economic development, to see these women as protagonists and as the seers of how we transform inclusive economic programming, create budget lines, philanthropy, nonprofit complex of how we use subsidies to keep people poor. No, we need to change that system as feminist economists and push philanthropy to start looking at these kind of membership cooperative institutions that already exist and to stop the harm.
No, that's great. I know we have to move to questions. So I did have something I wanted to ask you about how all of your work is so collaborative, but let's see if there's time at the end, because I really want to give people a chance now.
Yes, sure.
I already see some things in the chat. People are chomping at the bit here to get their questions in. So I think the way we'll handle this is people can raise their hands and I can call on you, but also when there's questions in chat, Mary, maybe you can bring those to the group. So
Sure.
do we want to start with some raised hands or chat?
Let's go with the raised hand, and then I'll kind of consolidate the questions in the chat and bring those as well. Maybe we can, since we're a little short on time, maybe we'll ask you a few questions at once, Caroline.
Yeah.
Yes, sure.
They'll go over to you.
Okay, great. So I think Sokozili?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, I'm Toko, dialing in from Cape Town. I have a bit of a selfish question, and it was triggered by something that you said, Caroline, about kind of decentralizing our work and research. And I'm looking at what, my area of study is looking at the history of austerity and looking at it as it's been implemented in South Africa. And so I was wondering if you have any scholars or ideas or readings that we should be thinking about that's not from the usual canon. So just, if you had any suggestions around, because obviously, the interaction between what happens at the macro level is felt at the micro level in the formal level. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Oko. Charlotte, did you want to ask your question, or I can go ahead and read it if you would prefer? Okay, I don't see her coming out mute. Okay, I'm going to ask this question too. She sent her question in early.
Sorry, I just had to unmute. Please go ahead and ask
it. Go ahead.
Okay. I just first want to thank both Suzanne and Caroline for this, and also IAFFE. I noticed how wonderfully this question of research method was woven in through this entire talk. And both in terms of personal histories and in terms of relationship to the community, but also in terms of difficulties getting published, being taken seriously. So my question was really a kind of cheat. It was 3 questions in one, but the question really was, epistemology and methodology are so central to what you do. And it seems to include both your personal positionality and your relationship to those you work with as researchers whom you're researching, and actually how you then carry that forward into academia. And I just wanted to name this because there's a lot of junior scholars here. And what advice do you have for incoming scholars trying to navigate that? Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great, let's go to Natasha, and then I'll go ahead. It looks like Mihail's put a bunch of 6 great questions, so I'll try and consolidate those while Natasha asks her question.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Caroline, for this talk. It was amazing. My question was more about how could we do more collaborative research between different institutions, between different researchers around the world, because I feel like we are so many here on this call from so many different places, and if you had advices about that.
Great, let me go ahead and consolidate these, and then Afua will come to you last. So there's a lot of great questions here about kind of just the radical aspect of your work that Mihail has asked. So there's different aspects of challenging patriarchal structures and empowering women in the African diaspora. Also, in what ways you believe kind of women's economic empowerment through cooperatives can impact broader social and political change. And also, how can these movements be inclusive to diverse women, including those with disabilities, LGBTQ plus women, and women from low-income backgrounds. So there's about 6 great questions in there that maybe we can have some follow-up with after this session. But I'll stop there, and then if you're not too overwhelmed, Caroline, we'll turn it to Afua for a last question, and then give you a chance to kind of run through all of those. Afua, over to you.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Hi, Caroline.
Hello.
Thank you so much for this talk. I really enjoyed it, and congratulations on the new book. I also want to say to the organizers that the comments in the chat are really great. So maybe they could take a photograph of it and give to you, Caroline, or for themselves.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, but so, I grew up in a society, which is Jamaica, where the banker ladies were a thing. I grew up in a household where, our matriarch was a banker lady. So, but there wasn't any danger or people wanting to arrest them, that kind of thing. So, but in the Canadian context, it was from you I first learned the danger that these women were in Canada, the police wanting to arrest them, and I just couldn't believe it. So what is the situation with that now? Like the danger they're in terms of being, the carceral state coming down on them, and how are they working to ensure that doesn't happen? Thanks.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, so there's a medley of questions, and I apologize if I don't get, all these questions are big, Suzanne and Mary. I'm going to try my best, because I see I have 10 minutes here, and there are 5 questions, but they're all huge questions for me. I'm going to start with Professor Aful Cooper's question, because that's top of mind for me. The criminalization of cooperators, feminist cooperators in a number of countries is something that junior feminist scholars, policymakers, we need to make some noise on. What's happening in the Canadian context, Professor Cooper, is that right now, the banker ladies have a movement in Canada. They have created something called the Banker Ladies Council during the pandemic. They have produced, or I have helped them produce, a film called The Banker Ladies, which is free. Someone can drop it on Films for Action, to change mindsets. They are not after academic literatures for everyone to do homework, but they really want a change in mindset. So they're into advocacy and education. The Banker Ladies have teamed up with the Ontario Cooperative Association, an APEC institution in Ontario that is one of the largest. And they have been endowed with significant funding from Canada's second largest credit union. These are no easy feats. What they're doing is building a ROSCA network for Canada and the world to show the contributions of what they're doing and to stop the fear mongering and criminalization under the Civil Remedies Act of 2001. So these women have taken research that we do as academics and are now using law and advocacy and civil society activism to host town halls to advocate for the rights of Black women cooperators in this country and beyond. So it's not all perfect yet by any means, but there are some of them, at least a dozen or more, that are now having big conversations on what ROSCAs mean and to remove this criminal intention against these people. So that's where we are with the Banker Ladies movement, and decriminalizing and thinking through how do we now compensate them for this labor. That's where we're on. That's where they are. I'm following and supporting, and many of you are invited to support the Banker Ladies movement. I think that Miley asked about a larger question on cooperative institutions, the broader takeaway. I do believe that member institutions, and I would refer Miley to this idea of varieties cooperativism, meaning that look for the bounty of membership institutions that exist, both formalized, informal, self-help, mutual aid, collectives, ROSCAs, all these institutions that exist, and look for ways that disenfranchised people, whether they're LGBTIQ or whether they are Muslim or whether they're Palestinian or disabled, where do we start shining a light on these different kinds of institutions that can start representing those groups? Lots of work to be done in the cooperative sector. It is still far too male, pale, and stale, and we need feminist economists to start unraveling the cooperative sector and participate fully in that field. Natasha out of Leuven asked this idea, this wants more sort of guidance on how do we do more collaborative research and working together. And I think in some ways that reminds me of the work of Charushila to some extent, again, with the advice and, you know, the connectivity. I think that collaborative research in feminist economics is a must. However, we belong in institutions that still prioritize individual productivity. And there's value for that. But I think if we're thinking about worlding feminist political economy, right? Worlding, that's the word here. We need to think of that as a collaborative, collective piece of work. Be informed by the Combahee River Collective in the 1970s, right? Of women who had to stand up against adversity and collectively pool their genius. That's how we get to a better place, right? And I think that that's what Professor Charushila was getting at, right? I mean, all this theory making, right? Trying to transform an academy that's so individualized and corporate. How do we push against that as feminist economists, feminist political economists? How do we bring our own subjectivities unapologetically to really say that we are here for community and to make the knowledge making in the university accountable to the very people that we are scholars for? You know, we are elites, but we don't have to behave like elitists in the university. We are here to make a difference. And that's the kind of feminist academic that I am all about. Stand up to truth when the institution that you work for is hurting you. And what will keep you safe as a young scholar who's doing daring work is to have a global network. It saved me in so many ways. And I think many of the elders and the scholars who are way senior than me can probably give some testimonial to this truth as well. It's only when you get to your 50s you realize that camaraderie of expertise and fusing it together is what makes the research so exciting. And finally, the last question from Cape Town. I'm not sure if I can be helpful, but there is so much literature on Black political economy to assist you in trying to understand issues of financial exclusion, austerity. I mean, the review for Black political economy is excellent resource for you. I'm thinking of names like, you know, you can think through like people like Nina Banks, Mary Kinyan-Dewey, Lynn Osome. There's so many great scholars, African and African descended women working in political economy that has a lot to say. We just have to learn how to do citation politics in political economy much better. I think I've answered everyone.
Thank you. Mary, do we have a minute or do we have to go?
Yeah, let's take a minute. I mean, we're at time, but there's obviously still interest. I see another hand up, so if people can stay, please stay. Yeah, I see another hand. Let's go.
Great. Katanya?
Hi, Carolyn. I'm so excited to be personally involved in this recording. As you know, I've been eating up everything that you've put out there. You have my entry into the space of what I don't know has been phenomenal, and trying to engage here in West Virginia, United States, with Black women that are in the space. There seems to be, it's very upsetting for me to use the word feminist. And I see that you use the word feminist frequently, openly, that you're a feminist. They want to back away from, and actually I have been cut off from Black women when I've used the term. Please share with me your idea, definition as a woman of color why you accepted that title, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. You know, thank you, Kaitona. Kaitona is part of a movement called An Economy of Our Own, and she's one of the leading activists fighting with, I think you're very involved in NOW and the National Women's Studies Association. So she's quite a force to reckon with, and happy to see a leading practitioner coming to an IAFFE event. Please join us so you can be the kind of Roxane Gay bad feminist that I am. So I proudly wear, you know, a feminist badge for sure, you know. There's no hiding that. And I think I grew up in a Caribbean feminist household, which is very clearly, you know, matriarchal, and that's the ethos that has crafted the person that I am. So to imagine not being a feminist because others think that they can hijack that term is crazy to me. And so I believe that I'm an intersectional sort of Kimberly Crenshaw, Roxane Gay feminist that is thinking about multiple identities when we think about exclusion. You know, I have Muslim, Caribbean, working class values that inform the kind of feminist that I want to be. And I think that when I mean, I can't tell other women how to do their feminism, but I do think that there is a place for us to hold that, right? And to share it with others. And I think that once people see the kind of feminism you are, what they see is that you're working for the well-being of humanity, right? That's ultimately what we are trying to do. We're trying to think through social provisioning in a place where economics has often ignored the work, the care economy of so many women. That's feminist economics, and I'm going to stand by it. We're not an easy group. There are all kinds of feminist economists that exist, for sure, Katona. So there are people who are not going to want to identify that. But I'm not going to wholesale give it away to other groups. I'm here about standing in my truth of what it means to be a Black political economist feminist.
I love it. And I just want to quickly say, with Juneteenth coming up and there being various Juneteenth celebrations taking place, the idea of the emancipation of the mind, I think, is so perfect for these upcoming events that I will be participating and speaking at. I will be co-opting that, if you will. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Keep us abreast.
I love it. We have two more hands, Abe and Aisha, maybe in that order, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up. So.
Hi. I was wondering if you could speak to the role of the solidarity economy as a response to incarceration and a role for potentially police abolition, especially coming out of the tradition of marriage and emancipation.
Okay. Can we have Aisha's question as well? And then Caroline.
Hi, Caroline. I just want to ask you were mentioning about the importance of philanthropy. And I just want to know how you do your advocacy work with philanthropy, to what extent you were successful in capturing the attention of philanthropy about the relevance of the kind of work you're doing. And also just one additional question, like you were talking about the importance of having a network. Have you ever been a loner? Have you experienced that? Well, I just want to know if you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. Okay, so incarceration, solidarity economies, cooperatives. I don't feel like I am able to speak to this. I know that there's work being done in prison systems on cooperatives. I'm not sure if Suzanne or Mary are familiar with that. I know that Jessica Gordon-Nembhard has outreach programs to people in the system and thinking through how membership institutions and pooling of, certain types of trades or businesses could work. I'm not sure about that relationship directly, so I'm not able to answer those questions. Aisha asks about philanthropy. So that's a big question, and it is a troubling one because philanthropy, NGOization, the ways in which subsidies are being organized has always been top-down driven, yes? And has been extremely problematic for people of African descent because they're always branded on the receiving end of those aid funds, yeah? Without any kind of imagination that they could actually be leading and undoing their own exclusions, right? And so philanthropy is a managed exercise. I mean, Insight wrote a really important book on, the philanthropy, that's not the revolution, okay? And so that managed resource is to fit people into the current capitalistic system. And I think philanthropy has a lot of unlearning to do and to reassess its relationship with what Dean Spade has been speaking about for some time on mutual aid and solidarity economics, on topics that are not comfortable to traditional nonprofit institutions. And I think that cooperative institutions, solidarity economies are much more setting the stage for how we think about workers' rights, how do we think of reorganizing business and society that may not be comfortable. It might be in complete confrontation with what the state and private sector are about. So philanthropy is troubling. Being alone, I think as an academic in big universities, that's a reality for many of us, particularly when we are vulnerable and new in institutions. No one I knew went to university or had university degrees. So navigating that space alone for a few years was a frightening ordeal. And you learn pretty quickly about the hostilities and the traumas you will endure navigating spaces like that. To keep yourself safe, it's best to find those people that you share common interests with, right? And that you can collaborate and negotiate and share your research with. So yes, to answer your question quickly, being alone has been a part of my journey, but it's not one I choose anymore, for sure.
Well, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up. And so I just want to say thank you so much, Caroline, for these answers, and everyone to your amazing questions, and which were really wide-ranging, but I think speaks to really the profound contribution you've made, Caroline, in your scholarship. And I think I'll hand it over to Mary. I mean, thank you so much, the Online Events Committee, for organizing this, but I think you have some things to wrap up with, so I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, for your incredible moderation. And just a last reflection from me in terms of, the themes of building community and collaboration that came up throughout. I really want to celebrate you, Caroline, as someone who brings that in such a sincere way to IAFFE. You're such a supportive person. You just bring such a sense of warmth and inclusion, and really making a place for everyone, and the importance of tying the academic to the activist work. And I'm really just want to share my own personal gratitude for you. So thank you so much. And thank you to all again who've attended, who've asked questions, who put amazing reflections in the chat. And yeah, on behalf of the Online Events Committee, please look out for some of our upcoming online events. As Suzanne already mentioned, our next Fireside chat will be with Joanna Rostek, who is the 2023 Agrawal Book Prize winner. and her book was on women's economic thought in the Romantic Age. This will be on Monday, June 24th from 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern. There will also be some opportunities for hybrid and remote participation in the upcoming IAFFE conference, so look out for more information about that. And then again, you can find all of our past events on the YouTube channel. So thank you everyone so much. Big congrats to Caroline and big thanks to Suzanne again. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Love you all. Keep in touch for sure.